really pond weed, they were floating everywhere. So I could just scoop them up with my hand, which is what I did there, and you can see they were sprouting and spreading, right? So we, when we went through the analysis, we said we really think we need to reset the lake. It's too widespread. The reservoir milfoil, the currently is too widespread. Let's do a whole lake fluoridome treatment, and then we'll see where we can get from there, and hopefully just have to do spot treatments after that. Okay, so we'll talk about the results of that tonight. We wanted to maintain aquatic vegetation to support recreational uses. We recognize how important this lake is for recreation, and so we wanted to make sure that that was part of what we were doing, recognizing that as a shallow lake, it needs to have vegetation. You don't want a lake without vegetation that's shallow, or you're going to have severe algae blooms, potentially toxic algae blooms. They're going to get worse. Okay? And then we wanted to assess and reduce, if necessary, nutrient loading. There's been some monitoring over the years of the man drain, and there was some belief that it's a major loader of nutrients. We thought it was kind of inconclusive. Eagle did their study, but they didn't do flow and some other pieces with it. So we said, let's do 2 years of monitoring and see if we can really figure out what's going on in the man drain and how important it is as a nutrient source. And if it is a nutrient source, let's do something about it. So we put some budget into the plan for that. And then we wanted to understand harmful algal risk and response plan. We know that cyanobacteria can produce toxins. You have toxin-producing species that occur in your lake. And so we wanted to know, what can we do about that? What do we need to know about that to make sure that we're recreating on the lake safely as we do this? Okay, so let's start with what we did in 2022 and 2023. We discontinued aeration. Remember, we said we can't afford to do aeration and do aquatic plant management. We didn't see in the water quality analysis that we saw any true benefits that we were realizing from the aeration. So we decided that we would discontinue that and focus the dollars of the SAD on aquatic plant management. We implemented the whole lake fluoridome treatment in 2023, in the spring of that. So we'll talk about the results there. We purchased equipment and installed level waters with the man drain. So we started that monitoring process, and I'll show you some of the results and where we're going with that. And then we began developing a harmful algal bloom strategy, and I'm going to give you some thoughts on what we're going to do for monitoring for that for this next year. And then we continued that monitoring. So let's get into the heat of it here, the heart of it. What did we do in 2023? Remember, in May 2022, we needed to have some data for Eagle to be able to get a whole lake fluoridome permit. This is something that they're very cautious about giving out. Whole lake fluoridome does affect the native species that are out there, and so there were some concerns about what would happen. So in 2022, just to keep things recreational available, we had to treat 155 acres with dicot or dicot Priscillacor mixture. Priscillacor we did it in nearshore areas because it's more effective at your reservoir milfoil and can last a little bit longer, but it's expensive, so we didn't want to do all 140 acres with that. So we did that with dicot. And then in August, we had to come back and treat another 7 acres. We had some problematic areas pop up on the southern end of the lake, and so PLM came back out and treated those. That's a lot of herbicide use, and we really want to peel that back. We want to get to less. So on May 4th, the whole lake fluoridome treatment started. It's spending $71,000 to do that. Remember, there were some concerns because we did genetic testing of the reservoir milfoil, and 25% turned out to be what we would call resistant to fluoridome. There was some question, we had a lot of discussion about, is this going to be effective? How effective is it going to be? So the way we budgeted it was to do the whole lake fluoridome, and then we had money in the budget to come back and do spot treatments of the resistant ones with something like Priscillacor that it's not resistant to. So I'll show you those results. And then in May 2024, surprisingly, it wasn't your reservoir milfoil that came back, it was crystal, which we knew that was a risk when we went into that, and I'll show you some of those results too. Okay, so remember, we picked option 2 when we started this process. I just want to point out here, we had some risks. We said, there was a high proportion of resistant genotypes. We knew there was some resistance in there, so we had to be prepared for that. We knew starry stonewort was a new invasive that had been identified once we started monitoring, and we knew if we opened up that plant community by killing a lot of the reservoir milfoil, starry stonewort could expand. So that was a concern we had. And then we were worried about poor water quality while plants reestablished. Aquatic plants do take nutrients out of the water column. We want that benefit of them taking it out of the water column. And if we lose that as we're trying to reset the system, water quality could degrade. So those are some concerns that we had, and we knew going into that. So we partnered with Dr. Ryan Kuhn. We did the genetic testing. I'm not going to talk about that, but I am going to talk about what happened. So here's a map of curly leaf pondweed. We do the June surveys for curly leaf pondweed because remember it senesces or dies in the middle of the summer. So if we do an August survey, we're not going to find the curly leaf pondweed necessarily. We want to know what it is in the early part of the summer. So if you look at June of 2022, all these dots, the darker color that they are and all that red is where curly leaf pondweed occurred in high density. So it was all on the left side of the lake, it was all on the north side of the lake and into the southern basin. Okay? Fast forward to June 2023 when the Florida dome was just started and put in May, and now we did a survey in June and look at how much of it had already started to fall off from those 2 years. We already see the red, it's less red, it's getting more yellow and green, that's lighter density of the plants. We're already seeing both the Eurasian milfoil and the curly leaf start to diminish. So that was a really good sign. In the fall, we only found a few sprigs of it. So now we said, okay, let's look at 2024, because we wanted to go out and survey, this is this past month, to see, and we found almost 120 acres of curly leaf coming back. Okay, does that mean we failed? Not really. I think this is one of the risks, right? We knew that was going to happen. If you remember, in 2021, we had all these turions floating all over the lake. Those turions burrow in the sediment, and then they get away from the Florida dome to the water column, they're avoiding the Florida dome, and then they can resprout the next year. So the idea this year, why we treated so early, was one for recreational purposes. We didn't want the lake to be full of curly leaf pondweed, but we wanted to treat before the turions are developed by those plants. And by doing that, what we're going to do is over the years, starve the sediments of whatever turions are in there. They'll sprout the next year, we'll kill those, and eventually there'll be less and less turions and drive it down to where we're only doing spot treatments. My hope is next year is significantly less than this. But I don't have a turion density survey. That's not something we budgeted for in the SAD. It is something you can do. You can go out and take sediment samples, and you can use a sifter, and you can count how many turions there are per acre kind of thing. Sometimes we do that, sometimes we don't. In this case, we knew there was probably a lot of them, and that's what happened this year. So our hope is next year this goes significantly down as we start to starve those turions. So we've got to stay on top of it in May to do treatments to starve those turions out of there. Okay? Any questions on curly leaf?
Was there anything, Joe, on, now I understand that the season on the curly leaf started about 3 weeks early, and that it was widespread in the Michigan area. I believe you said Minnesota too, where there was a lot of curly leaf this year. We had very little ice cover.
Yep.
And so that was another reason why it did so well. It was so good.
My guess is that's a good thing for us because I want to sprout, and this year I want to sprout as many of those turions as I can. So when I did this treatment, when we go through this treatment, we're killing those plants.
Yeah.
Right? So probably I'm hoping that's working in our favor because a lot of them sprouted out and then we can get into those. But that's why we have to be out on a survey. We typically do our spring survey in June. That was before we were doing heavy treatments, and plus, we were 3 weeks earlier this year, so kind of thing. We can look at adjusting the timing of our spring point intercept survey. We might do that. It's just a balance of making sure they're out and growing when you do the survey versus when they're getting to become problematic. Or,
So how long would it take for the curly leaf to finally completely drop from the last treatment? I know it's like 2 to 3 weeks, but there's still some of it out there, so can it take longer?
I was out on the lake today, I didn't see any.
Okay.
So usually that dipod will act really fast. Dipod's faster than an endofall or some of the other
I know
more.
there must be something growing out in front of us.
Illinois pondweed.
That's pondweed.
That's all Illinois pondweed.
It's not the wide stuff, it's not the big wide stuff we had last year, it's different.
What we saw those out there today, I'll have surveyors out there next week, so I'll have the data from the point intercept, so I'll know exactly what's there when my surveyors are out there. What I saw today was Illinois
Yeah, I know,
pondweed.
it's a lot of that pondweed because I pulled a ton of it out myself last year.
Yeah, and then I saw some Dawson area, some of the, there's some sprigs of that floating around, but it was mostly Illinois pondweed. I like Illinois pondweed for recreational lake. It doesn't tend to grow all the way to the surface. It tends to grow lower in the water column, so it's not as problematic. Where you are. That's not for every spot in the lake. I get that. It's going to be challenging. But in general, that's a good plant because it gives you a lot of the benefits that you want to be by plant community without nearly as many recreational impacts. Okay.
distinguishes the Illinois pondweed from the other pondweed?
They're different species, they have different leaf sizes, different, just structures that are in there. So there's lots of different pondweeds. You have a large leaf pondweed, you have a couple of different ones that are in here. So it's just one of the many species. Yeah, let's talk about Eurasian water milfoil. This is the one that worried me more. So curly leaf became more of a problem than I expected. Eurasian water milfoil, if you look at it, look how dense it was. All through that same area, southern part of the lake, all on the west side of the lake. In September 2022, sorry to violate, equipment failed on us that year, so we didn't get the heat map that you can see how dense it was in 2022. We went out in September 2023, couldn't find it. Couldn't find any at all, surprisingly. So like every time they threw the rake and all that kind of stuff. I expected there to be patches somewhere in there, the resistant milfoil, but it's not there. And we were out there today, I didn't see any of it. PLM was out, they didn't see any floating fragments, any of it when they were out there either.
It's been floating by us either.
Great. So the fluoride treatment was fantastic in terms of doing that. Now, if you look at the heat map of a lot of that plant density, look at how open and blue it is now. So we need plants in these areas from a water quality perspective, and I'll show you that, right? So we kind of reset the system. Now we need to promote natives to start to come back into those areas and stabilize those sediments, take up nutrients, provide those services that we need as well. But the good news is our concerns about having resistant Eurasian water milfoil, that's wiped out. It was very effective when we were doing. Is there a question somewhere?
You said we were establishing native. Is that by nature doing it or by seed?
Nature doing it. Yeah. It's very difficult to transplant plants in the lakes. We're learning how to do that. I know a couple success stories that have been involved in a couple of those. But in this case, we have enough of the native species hanging on and around that we can just let nature do its work. The idea is to keep the invasive species from taking back over, right? And let the natives get in there. So what's the one concern that we have? Starry stonewort. This is another invasive species that grows in these really dense beds on the bottom. It's actually a macroalgae. So one of our concerns was if we open up the plant community, is starry stonewort going to expand in the lake? And the short answer is sort of. It did expand from 10% back in September of 2021 to almost 30% occurrence in 2023. However, it was pretty light when we saw it out there. It wasn't in that really dense growth, so that was good news. The spring survey will give us a good indication of what we're looking at. And it was just kind of interspersed into a couple of pockets. It was pretty heavy on the north end, and that's somewhere that we're going to have to consider. So one of the options we have this year is you can treat starry stonewort. We might spot treat some areas, mostly to allow natives to get in there, right? We don't want it to expand and hold the natives from growing in there. We're just trying to hold it at bay to allow the natives to establish so that they can try to hold it at bay. The other thing that you'll notice, most of it's in the deeper areas, so it's not nearly as impactful from a recreational standpoint. Okay, the downside is it is an algae, it's a macroalgae, so the algicide that we would use is a copper-based algae. If we're not great at it yet, because starry stonewort's kind of new invasive species, CPRO does have some formulations that they're working with that have shown to be pretty effective. It's okay, copper's safe to use, they use it in drinking water reservoirs all the time. I just don't want to use it long term because then it can lead to recycling of nutrients and some other problems that are there. Okay, so what we're really doing this year, I want to see the spring survey. We're going to make an evaluation about whether we think we need to do any spot treatments. We may treat just a little bit up in the northern end where it's really dense, if it's still dense there again. And then we'll see the fall survey and make a decision there. In Michigan, you're not allowed to treat for starry stonewort with copper until after July 1. So we have some time before we would even be allowed from a permit standpoint to do that. The other thing is I'm going to talk to you about toxic cyanobacteria that occur in your lake. We're putting copper in it to kill toxic cyanobacteria. They can release toxins. So we want to be cautious about how much copper we put in there because I don't want to cause a toxic event in your lake. Okay, right? I'm sure you won't appreciate that. So one thing at a time. So this is getting into what are the next steps. We had, there was a fair amount of Clara that was growing there too. That's another macroalgae, similar, native and similar to starry